Hey everyone, my guest today is Nathan Cheng. After dropping out of his PhD in physics because he realized that solving aging should be his number one priority, he started to write a newsletter about investing in longevity. He also became one of the partners of HealthSpan Capital, which is a venture capital fund investing in longevity startups. Recently, he co-founded two organizations which are critical in our progress towards making death optional. First is the Longevity Biotech Fellowship, which takes ambitious technical people which want to contribute towards our fight against aging and gives them first a general introduction to the field, and second helps them out with getting connections with other people that are maybe at the same stage, also investors and this whole community. And second of all, Vitalism. Vitalism is a community of people that actually want to solve aging. So not the Peter Thiel sense of longevity of, well, I want to be as healthy as possible and then drop dead after like 100 years, but actually a way of solving aging permanently, so you don't have to die. During the interview, Nathan is going to explain this in more depth. So now, enjoy my interview with Nathan Cheng. You have a newsletter about investing in longevity, and you also work at a venture capital fund, HealthSpan Capital, that invests in longevity. How is investing in the longevity industry, especially if you go for trying to solve aging, different from classic investing?
Yeah, so you mentioned I write a newsletter, Longevity Market Cap. That's actually how I got my start in the space in longevity. And then, started HealthSpan Capital. So I've been doing that for about 3 years and invested in a lot of like early stage longevity biotech companies. So yeah, the main difference I would say when you're looking at trying to invest in, let's say, trying to solve aging versus, let's just say even just traditional biotech, because a lot of people invest in biotech as well, is it's very difficult to invest in something that's so frontier, right? That most people don't have in their minds like this conception that this is possible, right? So there's one point where you're just trying to convince people that this is even possible, whereas like other domains, at least people have some sort of framework in their mind of like of a cancer drug or like a tech startup or whatever. Like that seems reasonable to them. So that's like one thing. It's just like so big that some people aren't even thinking that this is possible, right? So that's one part. But then if you want to get into like the nitty gritty of like biotech investing versus longevity, the other main difficulty, trying to demonstrate that whatever you're trying to develop, this technology, it could be cell therapy or a small molecule drug or gene therapy or something even more exotic than that. The issue is if you're trying to solve longevity, there's not an easy way to demonstrate that, right? Because humans live so long, the FDA doesn't really have a framework for companies to have lifespan extension or aging or longevity on an indication, like an actual sort of like target disease almost, right? So like aging isn't really classified as a disease at this moment. So yeah, so there's all sorts of difficulties there. And yeah, so it's been really rewarding trying to, learn about this space in the past like 3 years, backing companies and founders who have that vision, and actually developing some really interesting technologies to try and get us there and demonstrate longevity through different strategies.
What is like, from your experience of investing and also writing the newsletter, like a counterintuitive thing that you learned about this space that you like, maybe if you start out you didn't know or you didn't think about?
Yeah, I think one thing that I like to tell people, especially through my work at Longevity Biotech Fellowship, where we're trying to get really smart people who are aligned on trying to tackle this problem of aging and obviate aging completely, is that a lot of people think that trying to modulate aging in a small way might be easier because they're thinking, oh yeah, well, we just have to like change aging a little bit, and then maybe we will get a little bit of health span or lifespan extension, and that should be easier, right? Because that seems like logical. But actually, I feel counterintuitively that could be easy, not as easy. So it might be the same as trying to extend lifespan significantly, or it could be harder actually. So we don't know for sure. I mean, nobody's really demonstrated lifespan extension yet, or health span extension with a therapy or anything like that. But the issue is whenever you're trying to do something that is small effect size, at least in biotech, right, and medicine, that means it's actually a lot harder to detect. So you have to do like much larger trials, clinical trials, and those cost a lot more money, right? So actually, George Church said something along these lines, and for him, he thinks that actually, you should put aside the small effect size, slowing aging kind of stuff in a small way, and actually go for like age reversal, right? Because if you can demonstrate something that is extremely like significant and obvious, right, it'll be very easy to not just wake up society and regulators and so forth, and they can figure it out, but you just know for yourself that this is working. Whereas, a drug that extends human lifespan by, I don't know, like 5%, something like that, would be actually pretty difficult to detect and very expensive in clinical trials. So that's the one like very like practical sort of thing in this space, is just like, yeah, maybe people should be thinking about more significant, high impact ways to modulate aging, because it'll be immediately obvious, and it might be as easy. Well, it could be potentially the same level of difficulty as trying to do it in a small way.
What about those big things? Like, are there actually the big ideas right now? Because, like, especially like in drug discovery, you can't just say, okay, I'm going for a drug that's going to change everything. Or what would you say are the big path that are like big effect size? Because in the end, if you have a drug, it's just like the effect size that you have, right?
Yeah. Well, we have some potential areas of focus that we've outlined in a document called the LBF roadmap, right? Where we're trying to think of what are the things that could be iteratively developed that could plausibly lead to indefinite lifespan extension, so a very large lifespan extension. So that, yeah, just high level, those things are like biostasis, replacement, advanced bioengineering. But there could be other things, right? Like we don't want to. I'm not going to purport to say that I know the entire closed set of things, of big ideas that could have a significant effect size on aging. I think people should just, what we're really trying to encourage people is just think outside of the box, not just small molecule drug discovery. I'm not saying that that's bad or anything. Mm-hmm. Like I think people should try that kind of stuff too, and they are trying. So most of the companies, I would say, in the longevity space are going after small molecule drugs because it's an easier development path, and longevity itself is like, just doing a longevity company puts you at a certain level of risk because it's so new and difficult. So, putting on a new modality like a gene therapy or something like that, next generation gene therapy on top of a longevity company, yeah, I can understand why, founders don't want to stack, multiple different types of risks on top of each other. So back to your question, you asked, yeah, well, what are the big ideas? Well, yeah, we think you should either try to slow aging with, a trick of thermodynamics and chemistry, which could be cryopreservation, so or chemical preservation or something like that. So that's in the biostasis realm. So you can pause aging indefinitely. And then two, replacement. So this basically means whole body replacement, and there's different ways that could be done in an ethical way, and also progressive brain replacement, which people like Jean Hebert are working on at ARPA-H. Recently got hired there to run a program there. Hundreds of $1 million put to this sort of like moonshot mission to replace the neocortex with engineered neural tissue grafts. And then, and the last one is kind of like your standard bioengineering. So this basically means you need to understand what's going on, at the cellular or molecular level at some point, and develop sort of interventions, probably genetic and maybe cell therapies to intervene. So things like cellular reprogramming, like epigenetic reprogramming, I would put in there, and other different types of like gene therapies. So yeah, that's kind of like the way I see it. But I think people can think outside of the box and not just there could be other things that even outside of this LBF roadmap. But I think the fundamental principle is just the same, like doing hard things, right, or doing things that show like large lifespan extension or whatever. If your goal is to solve aging, then I would try and like encourage people to do that, because if you try and do something easy, like I don't know, a supplement business or something like that, it might be harder because actually you're just like competing with a lot of people, and the effect sizes are so small. So I think even Sam Altman like said something about this. Like he has like a blog post where it's just like do hard things because like it might be easier because you'll have less competition in some sense.
Okay, I understand. You're also the founder of or one of the founders together with Adam Grease of the Vitalism community. How is it like to try to grow a community in the area of longevity?
Yeah,
Yeah,
we've been building the community for about 1 year now. Yeah,
1 year. Okay.
officially. Yeah, so I'm a co-founder at Vitalism. Our goal and mission is to make fighting aging and death humanity's number one priority, and it all stems from a very simple, moral tenet that I think everybody gets behind, which is basically that life is good and death is bad. Preservation of life is a fundamental concept across all different religions, cultures throughout all of history. But when it comes to aging, people just get these weird, like, I guess, short circuits where they're like, oh, preservation of life is great, death is bad. But if you're old, maybe, you should just die or something like that, or death is fine, or, and there's this kind of like acceptance of what a normal lifespan should be. Whereas we just, plainly state that all death is bad, right? Like this just seems like a fundamental moral principle. And so we set out to build a community around this, like a social movement, so that we can find the people where this is their deeply held belief, and they want to advocate for this. They want to see a world where we are fighting as hard as possible against aging and death because this is the most important thing to them, right? So we've been doing this for a year. It's been interesting. I think you learn so much about like the community and people just like in general, like and like their psychology and like the way that people interact with each other by just building this movement. And so when we started off, we thought the most important thing, right, and this is probably the most important lesson that I've learned throughout most of my career working on longevity, which is just the power of alignment, right? Like this idea that you can align people on a goal, and how important it is to define what it is that you're aligned on, right? So you mentioned, oh, we're building this community in longevity, right? But what does that word even mean, longevity, right? Because some people think, we're building a community around like, exercise, or like, I don't know, like drinking kale smoothies, which, and sauna and cold plunges. That's totally fine. Like understand why that's like a definition of longevity for some people. And I think people should be doing what they can to reduce their, probability of dying from like, disease and stuff like that. That's totally cool. But fundamentally, like before we started Vitalism, we realized that there was a lot of people where their central goal in life was that, they wanted to fight aging. They needed to solve this problem. And it came from a very deep moral position. But we had no way to like articulate that. Like there's no word for that, right? And no way to like identify all the other people who actually believe that as well, right? So for us, I think the main innovation for Vitalism was just giving it a name, right? Like this name that for this a belief that so many people in the world have actually just like they just like naturally believe this, right? No, they didn't have to be convinced or educated or anything like that. This is just like something they logically came to the conclusion on, which, life is good, death is bad. Let's fight aging and death as hard as possible because aging is the number one thing that kills people. And so for us, building the community in some ways has been, very easy because like when I find, people who agree, you just like naturally have this connection, and then it's just like, oh yeah, well, you should join, right? Like, and they're
Yeah.
like, yeah, of course, I've been waiting my entire life to find these people, right? But then the other difficulty is just trying to find those people in the first place, right? Because there was no term for this beforehand, right? So we're all just kind of like randomly distributed around the world. But we estimate that there could be 1 million or so people around the world. It's not who believe this fundamental moral principle, and this idea that we need to fight aging and death as hard as possible. But yeah, even though it's a small percentage of the entire population, even if it's like 0.01% or something like that, it's still a lot of people around the world. And the main difficulty is actually finding those people, articulating, this idea, right, that we need to do something collectively as well, right? About, okay, yes, I believe it, you believe it, but like, what are we actually going to do together, and why we need to actually band together and not just like fight aging alone, like every man or woman for themselves, right? Like, yeah. So this is the main sort of challenge: finding the people, right, and actually getting them to coordinate, right? Yeah.
So is vitalism more based on this moral ground that you really think like, okay, death is bad and life is good, or is it more based on the common goal to solve aging? Because for example, as you maybe know, like I come more from a background of philosophy, and I don't really believe that there's good and bad. So I don't really say like death is bad, but I really want to solve aging because I love life and I would really like to live super long, maybe even indefinitely. Like I don't know what's gonna happen in like a million years, but like, um, so um, is it really, is it this belief death is bad, or is it more of the common goal to solve aging? Yeah.
Yeah. So so for people who are interested, you can check out, the Vitalism website.io, and
Mm-hmm.
in when we were thinking about like what is, how do we articulate what it is that we believe in, right? Because this is like the fundamental point of like, how do you figure out who should be part of this movement, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever? How do you make it more legible, whether you should, join this movement or not? So our solution was to create the Vitalist Declaration, right? So it's 5 points. You can find it on the website, vitalism.io. And I think the most important one is the first point, which we say, life is good, death is bad, or death is, humanity's primary core problem, and aging is its is primary agent, right? Like this idea that
Mm-hmm.
life is good, death is the thing that humanity is at its core really struggling with, and aging is the primary agent of the thing that kills most people. Okay, so that's kind of like the first point. And it took us a really long time to like really
Mm-hmm.
figure out the wording around that, because it was just like we had a private conference basically a year ago in Rhode Island, where we brought together many top leaders and our friends who are in the longevity space, and we wanted to kick off this this movement. And the first one of the things we spent a lot of time on was just like arguing over like these 5 points, the specific wording, and it's just like, is fighting aging the top priority or a priority, like just like these like nuances, right? And at the end of the day, I think there's like two things to take away from here. So the reason why we wanted to make the focus death and not just aging itself is twofold. One is kind of like just more of a technical point, which is like, I mean, you could imagine that tomorrow we find out that there's like some, I don't know, meteor or asteroid heading towards Earth and it's going to kill us in like 10 years. In which case, I would say, yeah, maybe we shouldn't make, fighting aging our top priority. We should probably figure out this asteroid thing, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of like the whole point of like the of a sort of more like practical concern, why we didn't want to bake it into, just aging instead of death into the Vitalist Declaration. But then that really leads to a more like, philosophical point, like why would we care about an asteroid more than aging? And the whole point is like, asteroid, if it killed everybody on Earth today, it would probably be pretty quick, right? You wouldn't suffer, let's say, like it wouldn't be this long, protracted, oh, I'm in
True.
a hospital bed
Yeah.
sort of thing. And this is the whole point, right? Because a lot of people, when they talk about fighting aging, they're like, oh, actually, aging is bad because it causes suffering. And people like to say that. Whereas, I think people, if they really think about, what is it that is really bad in from a moral perspective, it's the fact that aging kills people, and it's very hard to get people to say that and actually recognize it, even if they kind of like at a deep level in their mind kind of like understand it. And so that's why we wanted to really come out and say that death is bad, right? Like the fact that aging
Mm-hmm.
kills people is the number one problem, right? But I get it.
Mm-hmm.
Like a lot of people are like, yeah, I want to just like live a really, really long time. Maybe I just want to have death as a choice. And that's
Yes.
something we played around with as well at the beginning. Philosophically, we're like, well, do we really have to say death is bad? Can't we just say, we want to make death a choice, right?
Yes.
And we struggled with this, and I think at a fundamental level, we still wanted to just hammer home that like death is bad. Because if you just say, death is a choice, then it's just kind of like, oh, it's just like living and dying are just like two different like choices on par with each other. Just like, vanilla or chocolate ice cream. It's just like one of these choices, right? Whereas I think you would only want to die. We wanted to say like, people should have choice. Like I am actually, I think people should have choice over their own body. I think, right to die. I think that's fine, whatever. But at the same time, I wouldn't advocate for death. Like I wouldn't say like this is like just another choice. I would say like, death is usually only reserved for like extreme situations where you really don't you're either suffering a lot and there's no other choices, right? I think death should be like the last choice. It shouldn't be like just this thing that you're just like, oh yeah, life or death, whatever. I'm just gonna choose one or the other today. So yeah, so that's kind of our position on that. But that being said, a lot of people have different shades of like alignment on the Vitalist Declaration. There's people who are just like, no, I only care about health span. This is not for me, and that's totally cool, whatever. But then there's other people who have different shades. They're like, fighting aging is like top priority, but it's also with, on par with a couple other things like, climate change or AI safety. And I think, there's different ways that people can be, mostly aligned or like 99% aligned. I think, humans are just so, varied, right? There's so many variants and just like the way people think that you're never going to get 100% alignment on just like, every single character and word on this, on this Vitalist Declaration or whatever, tenets you have. There's always like a range of interpretation and alignment there. Yeah, but I do think, like, at least personally for myself, I think that we have to be clear that death is bad, and it's not just that aging causes suffering and that's why we should fight it. But yeah, for some people that just means, yeah, death is bad because it takes away your choice, and I can
Yes.
understand that, and and so forth. Yeah, but they still want to have the choice, which I can understand as well. I'm sympathetic to the idea of having choice.
Okay. I think now you really got me, because before I was a bit like skeptical. If you say like if it would be like super hard line, like I still support the community because I really support the goal. But in the way you explained it now, that is like in a way it is hard line that you say death is bad. Like you don't say like no, it's like kind of okay. No, you say it's bad, but it's not like it should be forbidden. And the way you explained it, I really understand. Like that, it's nothing. Like it's nothing that should be maybe forbidden, but like it's also nothing that should be encouraged in any way, because like if you want to die, there's a situation behind that is maybe not so good, and it could maybe be different. So you don't want to die.
Yeah,
But
yeah. Yeah, and
yeah,
an interesting point is when you talk about suicide, right? Like if I
yeah,
type into Google right now how to commit suicide, the
mm-hmm.
top Google box will probably be this thing that says, "Oh, here's a suicide hotline. Don't kill
yeah,
yourself." They're like,
yeah,
even if it is my choice, they're like, "No, don't kill yourself," or like firefighters or policemen will like jump out of a
mm-hmm.
building and like tackle you to stop you from
Yeah,
like jumping, right? Like I think yeah, it's fine that in the future if we have like extremely long lifespans, I think people will want to have like a choice and so forth, and I think choice is fine. But anyways, back to your point.
no. I understand. So coming to a bit of a different topic. So vitalism is also quite focused on building longevity states. What do you think is the role of longevity states, network states, or even something like pop-up cities like Zella City for our progress into solving aging?
Yeah. So yeah, for anybody who's interested in network states and longevity states, they should definitely check out Balaji's book, right, The Network State, which really talks about this in more depth. But yeah, so at a high level, from the perspective of vitalism, like we're thinking about, okay, we need to fight aging and death as hard as possible, and this means what would it look like in a world where everybody aligned on this principle that we need to fight aging and death. This is the top priority. Well, it would look like massive resourcing. So like we would dedicate large amounts of resources, both financial and human resources, to fighting this problem. And we think that would look something like 1% of GDP or more, right? So for context, if you go to like in history, if you look at the Apollo program, right, in the 1960s, right, this was this was a top priority of the United States, right, because at a fundamental level they were in this race, they were basically trying, it was the showdown between communist ideology and liberal capitalism ideology, and this was a moral principle, right, and it manifested itself in the space race, right. And the Apollo program was like 0.5% or 0.5% of GDP per year at its peak, right? So this is the kind of level we're looking at. We're just like, yes, it should be, if we want to fight aging and death as hard as possible, it should be reflected in state level resources, right? In a state or across the world, right? And yeah, so if we're thinking about how do we get there, right? How do we even just like demonstrate like you know one state, one state that just says this is our top priority and we're going to allocate the resources accordingly. Allocate 1% of the state GDP to fight aging and death. Balaji has a great way of thinking about this and kind of like laid out a roadmap in the network state, which is basically a how-to guide to start your own country or whatever. So, for longevity, it might be very difficult to just lobby people through the traditional means to get to 1% of GDP per year to fight aging. And I'm not saying it's impossible. I think people should try. Balaji, Srinivasan in the network state lays out this kind of alternative plan, which is just like, okay, if you wanted to start a new country that's aligned on some sort of new moral innovation, right, like fighting aging and death being like the foundational principle, then one thing you might want to do is this network state idea, which is just like finding first people who align on this moral principle, right? This moral innovation, he calls it in his book. So for instance, in our position, maybe it's just like, yeah, life is good, death is bad, right? We should fight aging as hard as possible. And you find these people just in the internet, right? They just all exist in the cloud. The internet is basically this way to find people who have maybe uncommon beliefs, frontier beliefs, right? That is not in the mainstream, right? And normally before the internet, you would just get drowned out, because you're just like one person in society, right? You don't know anybody else, and just like it doesn't matter, right? But because of the internet, these people who share this, moral belief can find each other, and that's what's happening, with Vitalism and other people who are building similar communities, and they can find each other, and then they align in like an online community. Okay, that's great. So now they exist in the cloud. They're sort of coordinating. They find they're getting some sort of like a critical mass. But through my time of like building communities online and so forth, that online only doesn't work, right? Like you can only go so far with just an online only community. People can talk to each other and so forth, but it's really important to be able to interact in person, right? That's when you actually really understand people and so forth. And then even from like a political level, there's a lot of benefits to having political capital concentrated in a physical proximity. Like that's what like voting and swing states and stuff like that. That's basically highlighting the importance of having like a physical presence, right? Physical political capital concentrated in a certain area. So yeah, so the whole idea for longevity states is that, network states or longevity network states, is to find those people and then actually manifest in physical space, not just hanging out on a Telegram or a Discord, right? So an easy way to do that is just with a conference, right? Like that's basically what happens in a conference, right? People who are interested in some sort of thing, right? They come together, and it could be a community or whatever, or Bitcoin or whatever, it could be any community. And they come together for like maybe a few days in like one city, right? And they interact, they network, and it's really great, right? People get to know each other. So then the question is, okay, the end goal is to have, people living and voting and interacting and building like in some future longevity state where they all are together. Today, conferences are pretty commonplace, but they're only a couple days. And so what is the thing that's in between that, right? Like how can we like build from one to the other, where we have conference on one side, but then we also have like an actual state where people are living full time, working together and so forth. So then this brings us to pop-up cities, right? And this was kind of like this new innovation experiment that Vitalik did the first time in Zuzulu, right, in Montenegro. And the whole idea is, yeah, you can create like almost like a short version of the longevity state, right, for a short period of time. For a lot of these, they're like a few months or whatever, or 1 to 2 months, and they bring people who are aligned on some sort of mission or interest, right? And yeah, and they work together. Usually there's some sort of a way for them to like collaborate but also live together, right? And that's really key, because when you're in like this temporary artificial concentration of density of people, you really cannot replicate this anywhere else. Nothing like this exists outside of like pop-up cities. And this is where certain things can happen, like different things can be built that couldn't be possible anywhere else or any other place, because you've just created this density that exists nowhere else in the world. And that's the real power of pop-up cities, right? That you have this concentration. It's almost like a longevity state for 2 months or something like that, and people are working together, and also like culturally, like you're bringing all these people have this shared almost culture, right, around health, life, and so forth, and it's just so like refreshing to be able to just like speak freely about all this kind of stuff, and it's not like a weird thing to say death is bad, right, or that I want to live indefinitely, right? And that's another thing that I think people don't really understand either. It's just like the power of like creating this, temporary like cultural place where like, you just share the same beliefs, and you're working hardcore with surrounded by other people who are hardcore, trying to fight aging and death. And it's just like completely energizing and totally different. And not on top of it, obviously, the network effect, right, of bringing all those people together, what possible collaborations could result when you bring those people together. I think that's really important too. So yeah, so that's kind of like how pop-up cities I think really fit into like network state, kind of like longevity state movement.
Have you ever joined a project that is similar to Zeller City?
Joined. Okay, so I've attended 2 pop-up cities so far. So I attended Zuzulu for 2 weeks, and then I also joined Vitalia for about 2 weeks back. That was this year, yeah, I think in February.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, I've been involved in those, and Vitalism Foundation is also organizing a pop-up city for next year in April and May called Vitalist Bay, and this is going to be the biggest longevity event in the Bay Area. 2 months, for hardcore people who are fighting aging and death and so forth. So yeah, and of course, it's going to be really cool because it's in the Bay Area where there is like that kind of natural curiosity and interest in longevity. So just concentrating that mass to nucleate like the movement there, I think that's going to be really powerful. But yeah, so but I'm really excited to see Zeller City as well going, because it is also very much aligned with this idea of fighting aging and death. Victoria Forest, of course, is one of our cherished community members at Vitalism. So yeah, we're excited to support that as well.
How was your experience like in Suzalu and Vitalia?
Okay. Zuzulu was interesting because that was the first one that I had ever attended. And honestly, when I first was told about the project, right, the event, I was a little skeptical. I was just like, I got so much work to do, right? Like, I don't really want to travel all the way to Montenegro, because it is kind of like it's kind of off the beaten path for me, at least, where I am based in Toronto. But yeah, but when I got there, it really did open my eyes. I thought it was really interesting to create this like this artificial density where you're just like every day, I have my routines or whatever I'm working, but like I just bump into people all the time, right? It's like kind of like a college campus almost, in that sense, where you're just like, oh, you bump into your friends all the time. And for me, working on longevity, and specifically like the vitalist perspective with longevity in a big city like Toronto, I don't know that many other people who are working on this. It's not like I'm going to walk on the street and accidentally bump into anybody who also believes what I believe, or who's like also as motivated and dedicated to fighting aging and death, right? So that was really cool. And Zuzulu was interesting because it's the first one, but they had many different tracks, right? Like all the different communities that they brought together were interesting. Like I did definitely met some really cool people, but it was kind of like, it was like AI, new governance, new jurisdiction. It was like AI safety, and then a little bit of longevity. But then even then, the longevity aspect was, as broad as the longevity term is, which is just like it included everybody from biohackers to the other side, where any variation in their perspective of like fighting aging and so forth. So it was a mixed group, which is fine in some respects, because you get to like expose yourself to all these different interests and so positions. But it would be harder to find people to collaborate with if they don't share your same ultimate mission, let's say. And then so then Vitalia was a little bit different, because not just the different locale, right, being located in Prospera and having this kind of like regulatory arbitrage, accelerated development sort of aspect to it, which in itself was pretty unique. But then as well, I think with Vitalia, it was such that I think this was like definitely in terms of mission alignment and so forth for what I'm interested in. It was definitely more interesting to me because they did straight out say like on the motto, the whole point of Vitalia is to make death optional, which is some more or less aligned with what I'm trying to do as well. Yeah, very, very, very aligned. But then the other thing with Vitalia is just like the regulatory arbitrage kind of stuff is like cool, but it's like a double-edged sword, right? Because like the other aspect is if you try and do this special economic zone in this country that is not that wealthy or developed, or rule of law could potentially be in question, then you have these like risks of you build up this place, but then maybe you run into legal issues in the future, which I think they're struggling with right now with the Supreme Court. But otherwise, I thought it was very interesting. But then I also think that because when I was there at Vitalia, I didn't get the sense that everyone, or even like 80% of people, were aligned on like this idea of like making death optional, or like we need to fight aging and death as hard as possible, at least, like let's say that, right? So it was definitely higher than other conferences and pop-up cities that I've been to, but it still wasn't, I don't know that it was like necessarily like the super majority or anything like that. Yeah.
So probably like City or Vitalist Bay are going to be the first ones where it's like really like super high density for those people. Exactly. What do you think are the biggest bottlenecks in longevity right now that definitely need to be solved so we can make progress towards solving aging?
So you mean technical, you mean social, everything?
Like what you would think is just like the biggest hurdle that we have right now that would make the biggest impact if it's solved?
Yeah. I guess, so there's one way to like, I can just, give you my answer with words, right? Well, I think words are kind of like meaningless in some sense, right? Because, if the biggest bottleneck is not something that you're working on, like it should be the thing that you're working on. Like it should be obvious through your actions. So the two things I'm working on, right, are the main things that I'm working on right now that take up most of my time. Vitalism Foundation, so move, the social movement to basically align people who already believe that life is good, death is bad, we should be fighting aging and death as hard as possible, and then like push towards establishing 1% of GDP, global GDP, per year dedicated to fighting aging and death. So that's like I think one of the biggest bottlenecks is just like the people who already believe this, right? So like we don't necessarily think we can convince the entire world to believe this just through like, I don't know, talking about it, right? Like so what we think what really needs to happen is just like to coordinate all the people who already believe this and push forward this. This is just like an alignment issue, just like find the aligned people and coordinate together, and then push towards the common goal, right? Which is to make fighting aging and death the number one priority. But then if you look at what I'm trying to do at LBF, it's actually kind of similar, even though slightly different mission. So with LBF, we're not specifically looking at the social aspects or the political aspects of resourcing and whatever for longevity or lifespan extension, But what we're looking at is like the science and the technology, and so working on the technical details of how we would fight aging and death. And even there, I think the idea is just like it's also alignment, right? Like we're trying to find people who are out there who are smart, who have some sort of technical ability, but are aligned on the goal, right? So the ultimate mission has to be, I want to solve aging, right? I want to fight death. And then when we bring them together, they can connect, they can find, co-founders, they can collaborate and so forth. And that's like the crux of, the LBF program. So at the end of the day, if you had to ask me, like, what is the commonality between those two? It's just like alignment, right? Like this is a frontier technology. It's a frontier moral position as well, in some sense, at least like being able to say it freely, right? And for me, I think the bottleneck is, just like finding the people who already agree, putting them together so that they can either work, to push politically and advocate, or they can work on the technical stuff, like the actual science and technology. So yeah, to me, I think it's just an alignment problem, which I guess is very like in vogue today. If you're talking about like, AI safety or whatever, it's all about alignment. Yeah, I think that's very much the same thing in humanity. So like high level, right? You can imagine, right? Like everybody who's working on aging because they want to solve aging must believe at some level that it might be possible, right, to do this, right? And ideally possible to do it in our lifetime, right? For people who have potentially a reasonable time left, let's say. So really what you're trying to say is like, given the resources on this planet, both human and, financial and whatever, how do I just like align all these like intelligent agents, right, on this planet to like actually move towards, building this, this path so that we can, actually not die of aging, in the future. So it's all about alignment, right? Unless you can solve aging by yourself, and in which case, go ahead. If you think you're so smart, come back to me when you've solved aging. But other than that, then it's an alignment problem. Like at its core, it is fundamentally an alignment problem.
Yeah. What advice would you give a young, driven individual that is maybe starting out and really wants to solve aging, so it's really aligned with the mission?
Yeah. A couple of things. So I would say definitely get plugged into a community, right? You don't want to be doing this alone. You need to be talking to other people, bouncing ideas off of other people. Ideally, you'll probably need to collaborate with other people who share your same ultimate mission. So yeah, try and seek out those communities, those people, work with those people who you feel like you share that deep, deep alignment with, right? So I think, I'm harping on this way too much, but yeah, alignment is super, super key. It's your superpower. So seek those people, seek those communities where you're aligned. And that could be like conferences, it could be online communities, whatever. But another way to find people who are aligned, but also a way to bounce ideas and create serendipity for yourself, especially if you're new to the space, is to write. So this is something that I cannot emphasize enough. And I think writing is also a cheat, it's a hack, right? Like a super cheat to like shortcut and accelerate your development in the space, right? And it's so important that like at LBF we make it like a core part now of the program is to like weekly about, it could be as simple as like just you're documenting your journey in this space, right? Like if you're exploring or building something, just like document that. Or if you're curious about a certain subject because you think you might want to build something in that space, just like write a series of blogs, like trying to figure out your understanding about this. Like it's like debugging, right? But when you post on the internet, the added benefit to this is, the internet is the largest network in the world, right? So people just through this magic of this crazy like thing will find you, right? And if they're aligned, right, they're more likely to reach out and because they kind of see how you think and what you believe in and what you're working on and your ability just through your writing, right? And then this is a way for people to connect and collaborate as well, and usually based on kind of like filtered on what makes you special, right? So it's it's really cool. And I've seen a lot of that happen where, people got their start, they were like working in a different field, like maybe computer science, and they just started a blog writing about like what interested them and what they were really curious about in longevity. And then it led to all these like great outcomes where they were able to collaborate with other people and so forth. So, and it's also great for your own learning, right? Like, this is the way that you can really drill down on and clarify your belief. Like to be able to write well, you have to be able to think and understand that concept well. And you don't really know what you know until you try to explain it to someone else, right? Succinctly. Yep. So yeah, so those are like the two main hacks, I would say. Yeah, find your people. Alignment is super key. Always keep that at your core, and then and write, preferably on the internet.
One last thing before we finish. What would you do if we would solve immortality, if we would solve aging? This would not be a problem anymore. Like, what would be the thing that you would do?
Yeah. I'd probably go back to doing what I was doing before I kind of like got bitten by this bug, this longevity bug, which is I was doing physics, and that was like, and also writing music, I guess. But yeah, I was in a PhD program doing physics, and I love physics. I think it's just like so beautiful, just like these ideas, and but order of operations matter, right? So working on physics first and then working on aging is a recipe for disaster. So I have to work on this problem first. But yeah, if we had lots of time, I would explore all the different experiences that are available. Like I just can't believe that people would ever get bored. Like when you ask people like, how long do you want to live? They're like, oh, I just want to live 80 years. I'm like, why? And then they'll say, yeah, I just think longer than that I'd get bored. And I'm just like, I have no counter argument for that. If they cannot convince you that there's like so much like, I don't know, books to read, movies to watch, like video games, like, I don't know, like, I don't play video games now because I don't have time for them, but maybe in the future I would. And just like all these different experiences, different people to talk to, it's just insane to ever think that you would ever be bored. So I basically want to do everything, but starting first with probably getting back to physics and writing music. So I think that's like really important that people really think bigger about like there's all this like wonders of the universe out there, and we could experience them if we just find a way to align and get this done. Solve aging, fight death.
Okay. Thank you a lot, Nathan. Is there any last thing you want to share?
If people who are listening, if this resonates with you, this idea that, death is bad, aging is bad, and we should be fighting it as hard as possible, and you want to connect with other people who share that belief, then you should join our community at Vitalism. We have a private Telegram where we've brought together scientists, engineers, entrepreneurs, all different types of people who share this belief and are willing to work towards this common goal. So you should join us. Every single person, I think, on this planet, this is their deeply held moral belief, should join this community. I mean, we need to band together to fight this. This is not something that any one person can solve by themselves. So yeah, I would say, get involved in Vitalism. So you can go to vitalism.io and sign up there. And then, for people who are interested in working on the technical problems, like scientific and technical problems of aging, I would suggest you join us at Longevity Biotech Fellowship. So, LBF is a nonprofit program. We're basically trying to find, really smart people who have, technical expertise, who aren't working on aging or not working on high impact stuff in aging, to come together and connect, get the contacts they need, and level up, be the best possible version of themselves to fight this problem of aging and death. So we run these workshop retreats. They're basically like 3 or 4 days, really hardcore. We bring in mentors from the industry and so forth who are also aligned, right? And we just connect people and give them everything they need to know to get started, to fight this and fight aging and death. And so our next workshop retreat is probably going to be the one at the pop-up city, Vitalist Bay. So in April, first week of April. You can sign up for the LBF if you're interested at longbiofellowship.org. And then, that brings me to the pop-up city. So for anybody who's interested in attending and participating in this like really exciting, the biggest longevity event in the Bay, we think it's going to be the the healthiest, most productive, most collaborative 2 months of your life, just surrounding yourself with other hardcore people who are working on fighting aging and death in the place where there's this high concentration of tech capital and so forth and influence, then you should check out vitalistbay.com. It's not open for applications yet for the general public, but if you want to be the first to know when that does happen, then you can sign up for the email list on the web page. So it's vitalistbay.com. And that's about it.
And if you want to join the pop-up city now, there's Zella City. Starts in 5 days from when this is going to be released, but you can still sign up even if it already started in Berlin. So this was my conversation with Nathan Cheng. Links to everything mentioned are in the description. And if you want to see me interview more people in the longevity space, there are way more videos of this on my channel. So just look around and have a good day. Bye bye.